On a crisp Sunday morning, Ava Carter stepped out of her charming Tudor-style home in Charleston, South Carolina, the soft golden light of early spring casting a warm glow over her quiet neighborhood. Dressed in a navy blue maternity gown, she carried herself with the grace and confidence of a woman who had spent years preparing for this moment. Despite being 7 months pregnant, she moved with a lightness that belied the struggles she had endured to get here. As she carefully descended the front steps, her husband, Ethan Carter, followed closely behind, a proud smile on his face. At 39 years old, Ava was finally expecting her first child, a dream she had once feared would never come true. For nearly a decade, she had endured the emotional roller coaster of failed fertility treatments, miscarriages, and moments of crushing despair. But now, against all odds, she was only weeks away from welcoming a baby into the world. They arrived at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, their place of worship and community for years. As Ava stepped through the grand wooden doors, she was immediately greeted by warm smiles and familiar faces. "Morning, Ava, you're glowing today," one of the older women at the church beamed, reaching out to touch Ava's belly. "Not much longer now. How's everything coming along?" Ava smiled, gently placing a protective hand over her belly. "It still feels surreal," she admitted. "We've been waiting so long for this moment. And now that it's almost here, it doesn't feel real." Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his presence a steady pillar of support. "She's been preparing nonstop," he added, chuckling. "I think we've gone through every parenting book and baby blog in existence." Ava let out a soft laugh. But deep inside, she knew her meticulous planning wasn't just about excitement, it was about fear. After so many years of heartbreak, she was terrified that something might go wrong, so she coped by ensuring every detail was in place. As the church service began, Ava and Ethan took their usual seats in one of the front pews. The warmth of the stained glass windows bathed the congregation in soft colors, and the familiar sound of hymns filled the air. When the Reverend paused to offer a special prayer for Ava and her unborn child, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Lord, please watch over this mother and her child. Let this new life be healthy, and may this family be blessed with love and strength." The Reverend prayed. The congregation responded with a resounding "Amen," and for the first time in a long time, Ava felt a true sense of peace. After the service, the couple decided to enjoy a quiet brunch at the Magnolia House, one of Charleston's most beloved restaurants. The cozy eatery, known for its famous shrimp and grits, was bustling with the weekend crowd. As they settled into a corner table, Ava spread out a list of last-minute baby preparations, her fingers tracing over the carefully organized checklist. Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You know, we don't have to plan every single moment," he teased, his hazel eyes filled with warmth. "Everything is going to be okay." Ava sighed, offering him a small smile. "I know, it's just, after everything we've been through, I don't want to take anything for granted." "You don't have to," Ethan reassured her. "Just enjoy the moment. You're going to be an incredible mother." Hearing those words made her throat tighten with emotion. Ethan had been by her side through it all, the sleepless nights after failed treatments, the devastating phone calls from doctors, the months of mourning after each loss. Yet, he never wavered, always believing that one day, they would have their family. That afternoon, they stopped at Charleston Place Mall for some final baby shopping. Ava walked into a high-end baby boutique, running her fingers along the soft fabrics of newborn onesies, blankets, and plush toys. Ethan, ever the meticulous planner himself, carefully examined each stuffed animal, as if selecting the perfect one was a matter of great importance. "What do you think about this gray elephant?" he asked, holding up a soft, oversized plush toy. "It could be our daughter's first friend." Ava chuckled, shaking her head. "You're worse than me when it comes to picking things out." Ethan shrugged. "Hey, this is a big decision. I want to get it right." The moment felt so normal, so full of love, that Ava allowed herself to believe, even for just a moment, that their life together was as perfect as it seemed. Later that evening, as Ava sat in their bedroom, she flipped through an old photo album, revisiting the moments that had led them here. Photos from hospital visits, snapshots of handwritten notes from doctors, The blurry image of their first positive pregnancy test, each one was a testament to their journey. Her fingers lingered on a picture of her and Ethan taken the day they received the news that she was pregnant. They were in their car, parked outside the fertility clinic, tears streaming down both their faces as they held each other tightly. "We finally did it," she whispered to herself. The road to this moment had been long, full of pain and sacrifice. But now, she had everything she had ever wanted, a loving husband, a home filled with warmth, and the miracle growing inside her. What she didn't know was that everything was about to change. The sharp pain came suddenly, jolting Ava Carter awake in the still darkness of her bedroom. She gasped, clutching her swollen belly, as the bedside clock read 2:45 a.m. again. "Ethan," she called out, her voice strained but steady. Her husband, Ethan Carter, stirred beside her, groggily blinking himself awake. It took only a moment for him to register the situation before he shot upright. "Is it time?" he asked, his voice laced with anticipation and nervous energy. Ava exhaled slowly, mentally timing the contractions, just as she had been taught in her prenatal classes. 7 minutes apart, consistent and growing stronger. "Yes," she nodded, gripping the edge of the bed as another wave of pain rippled through her. "We need to get to the hospital." Ethan jumped into action, grabbing the pre-packed hospital bag from the closet while Ava carefully eased herself up. Despite the pain, she remained calm, a trait she had honed over years of dealing with high-pressure situations as a financial risk analyst. She had always believed that careful preparation could prevent disaster. And now, more than ever, she needed to trust in that belief. The drive to Roper St. Francis Hospital was eerily silent. The usually bustling streets of Charleston's historic district were empty, the street lamps casting elongated shadows across the cobblestone roads. Ava sat in the passenger seat, her hands pressed against her belly, feeling the rhythmic movements of her baby. She reached for her phone, dialing the one person she knew she could count on in any emergency. "Mom," she said when Margaret Carter picked up after only one ring. The contractions started. "We're on our way to the hospital." "I'll be right there," Margaret replied without hesitation. "Stay calm, sweetheart. You've got this." The reassurance in her mother's voice grounded her. She could do this. By the time they arrived at the hospital, Dr. Harrison, her trusted obstetrician, was already waiting. "You've done beautifully, Ava," Dr. Harrison greeted with a warm smile. "Let's get you settled." The labor suite was a private room with a view of the Ashley River. A calming sight as dawn began breaking in the distance. The room was dimly lit, the atmosphere carefully curated for comfort and relaxation. At 6 a.m., Margaret arrived, breathless but steady. She immediately rushed to Ava's side, clutching her daughter's hand. "I brought these," she said, pulling out a bundle of prayer cards sent by members of their church. "Everyone's praying for you." Ava felt the sting of tears in her eyes. The support of her community, her family, it all made the pain easier to bear. "You're doing amazing," Ethan murmured, his hand resting on her back as she breathed through the contractions. Time seemed to stretch and contract with the waves of pain, her body working through the final stages of labor. Then, at 9:32 a.m., after one final push, the sharp cries of a newborn filled the delivery room. Ava collapsed back against the hospital bed, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "Congratulations, Ava," Dr. Harrison announced, her voice warm and full of pride. Ava felt her heart expand as the nurse placed the tiny, delicate body against her chest. She looked down at her daughter's soft, wrinkled face, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around Ava's thumb. The warmth of her newborn's skin against hers was unlike anything she had ever experienced. This was her miracle. The moment should have been perfect. But then, everything shattered. Quote, Ethan's voice was cold, emotionless. The room fell into a stunned silence. Ava's breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening protectively around her daughter. She lifted her gaze to her husband, disbelief and hurt flashing through her tear-filled eyes. "What did you just say?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her body still trembling from labor. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. "I need to confirm she's mine." The weight of his words crushed the warmth in the room, replacing it with an icy dread. Ava felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Margaret, standing beside her, whirled around to face Ethan, fury radiating from her. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed. "How dare you insult my daughter and grandchild like this?" Even Dr. Harrison stiffened, her years of experience telling her this was not just a moment of paranoia but something deeper, something calculated. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension crackling in the air like a live wire. "This isn't the time for this conversation, Mr. Carter," Dr. Harrison said firmly. "Right now, Ava and the baby need to rest." Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, his gaze locked onto the infant in Ava's arms. His expression unreadable, but unmistakably cold. Detached. Ava felt an overwhelming urge to pull her daughter closer, shielding her from whatever this moment meant. This wasn't the Ethan she had known. The man who had stood by her side through every fertility treatment. Who had wiped away her tears after every failed pregnancy. This was someone she no longer recognized. As she clutched her newborn tighter, a single thought consumed her mind. Why would he do this? 3 days after giving birth, Ava Carter sat in the hospital's maternity suite, cradling her newborn daughter, Isla. The soft morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a golden glow over the quiet room. To anyone looking in from the outside, this moment should have been perfect. Her husband, Ethan Carter, had barely spoken since the birth. His cold, calculating demand for a DNA test still rang in her ears. She had thought his silence was guilt, maybe even shame, but now, she wasn't so sure. A sudden knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Harrison, her longtime obstetrician, but something was different about her today. There was a tightness in her expression, a weight in her voice that sent a ripple of unease through Ava. "Dr. Harrison?" Ava's voice was cautious. The doctor hesitated, glancing toward the sleeping infant in Ava's arms before speaking in a measured, careful tone. "Ava, we need to talk, privately." Ava's stomach dropped. She swallowed, nodding, before Margaret Carter, her mother, stepped forward, her protective instincts flaring. "If this concerns my daughter and granddaughter, I'm staying. Doctor, I've been reviewing the DNA test results." She began, settling into the chair beside Ava's bed. Something isn't right. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She instinctively clutched Isla tighter, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harrison exhaled. "There are irregularities in the test data. The results don't match standard thresholds. It looks altered." Margaret stiffened. "Altered? What are you saying?" The doctor turned her laptop toward them, displaying a set of side-by-side comparison charts. "This is a normal DNA test result," she said, pointing to one side of the screen. The values were consistent, the markers clear. Then she pointed to the other side. "This is yours." The graph was erratic, unnatural, even to Ava's untrained eye. She could see something was wrong. A cold shiver ran down her spine. "This wasn't an accident," Dr. Harrison continued, her voice steady but filled with controlled anger. "Someone tampered with the data. Marg." Ava's breath came in shallow bursts, her mind spinning with fear, disbelief, and fury. Then, the doctor clicked again, pulling up a grainy black and white image from the hospital security cameras. Ava's stomach twisted into knots. A tall man in a suit stood near the hospital lab entrance. Glancing around suspiciously, Margaret leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That looks like Ethan." Ava's voice was barely a whisper, but the certainty in it was unshakable. Dr. Harrison nodded grimly. "We checked the hospital's access logs. There was an unauthorized entry into the lab database the night before the DNA test results were finalized." Margaret shot to her feet, fury burning in her eyes. "That bastard," she spat. "He did this. He tried to frame you." Ava felt her whole world tilt on its axis. Her husband, the man she had loved, the man who had stood beside her through every painful fertility treatment. Had he really tried to erase their daughter? Her fingers trembled as she clutched Isla closer, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why would he do this?" Dr. Harrison's gaze darkened. "There's more," she said, clicking to another screen. "One of our lab technicians, Mike Johnson, reported something suspicious." Ava held her breath. He was offered $500,000 to alter the DNA test results. Margaret let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. $500,000? My God. Ava could barely breathe. $500,000. Ethan had been so desperate to falsify this test that he was willing to spend a fortune to do it. Her mind flashed back to the moment in the delivery room, the way Ethan had stared at their daughter. Not with love, but with calculation. This had been planned. Mike refused the offer and immediately reported it to his supervisor. Dr. Harrison continued, but after that, he started receiving threatening emails. Margaret's jaw tightened with rage. Ethan, that snake. Ava felt like she might be sick. The man she had trusted, shared a life with, fought to have a child with, had betrayed her in the most monstrous way. The weight of it was crushing, suffocating. Just then, her phone buzzed. She nearly dropped it, her fingers trembling violently as she read the message from Ethan. Let me know as soon as the DNA test results come in. Her blood ran cold. He was waiting for confirmation of his crime. Ava looked up at Dr. Harrison. Her vision blurred with rage, heartbreak, and a terrifying clarity. Call the police, she said, her voice steady, unshaken. Final. Dr. Harrison gave a solemn nod, picking up the hospital's internal phone. As she dialed, Ava felt something inside her shift. Something deep and unbreakable. This wasn't just about Isla. This was about justice. This was about making sure Ethan Carter never got away with what he had done. She had spent years fighting to bring her daughter into this world. And now, she would fight just as hard to protect her. At Charleston Police Headquarters, Ava Carter sat in the cold, sterile observation room, her fingers clenching the armrest of the chair. Through the one-way mirror, she watched as her husband, Ethan Carter, sat on the opposite side of an interrogation table, his posture stiff but composed. Detective Lauren Davis, a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience, leaned forward, her sharp eyes locked onto Ethan. Let's go over this again. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice cool but firm. Where were you between 11:15 p.m. and 11:45 p.m. 2 nights ago? Ethan sighed, adjusting the collar of his expensive navy blue suit. The same one he had worn to their baby shower months ago, a twisted irony that sent a fresh wave of disgust through Ava. I was at home, he said smoothly, his tone devoid of emotion. Like I already told you. Detective Davis slid a black and white photograph across the table. A hospital security image, a tall man in a suit, sneaking near the lab. Ethan's jaw tightened for the briefest second before he regained his composure. That's not me, he said flatly. Ava's heart pounded as Detective Davis gave a slow nod, as if considering his words. Then, she pulled out another document, a sworn statement from the hospital's lead lab technician. Mike Johnson. Mr. Johnson says you approached him last week with a cash offer, $500,000, to alter the DNA test results. Davis continued. Ethan's lips trembled slightly, but he remained silent. You do realize, Davis added, tapping the document, that falsifying medical records is a federal offense? And offering a bribe? That's another charge. Ava watched as Ethan inhaled deeply, his mask of confidence beginning to slip. Then, Detective Davis opened a file filled with emails. Threatening messages, sent from Ethan's company's IP address, all directed at the same technician who had refused his bribe. This doesn't look good, Mr. Carter, she said, leaning back in her chair. You bribed a lab worker. When that failed, you tried to intimidate him into changing the results. And when that didn't work, you broke into the hospital system and altered the data yourself. Ethan's fingers twitched, his gaze flicking toward the one-way mirror. Did he know Ava was watching? She wanted him to see her. To see the woman he had tried to destroy staring right at him. Unbroken. Give. She pulled out the final piece of evidence, bank statements. Ava's stomach twisted as she saw the transaction history. Ethan had transferred $5 million to an overseas account. Detective Davis arched an eyebrow. So, Mr. Carter, were you planning to disappear? Hide your assets before filing for divorce? For the first time, Ethan visibly tensed. I exercise my right to remain silent, he said, his voice clipped. Ava gritted her teeth. Coward. Detective Davis smirked, as if she had expected that response. But before she could say another word, The door to the interrogation room opened. To me. Ava gasped audibly, covering her mouth with her hands. It was Claire Richardson, Ethan's assistant. The woman he had been seeing behind Ava's back. Ethan's entire demeanor changed. His face paled. His body stiffened. "Claire?" he breathed. Claire didn't look at him. She looked at Detective Davis. "I want to cooperate," Claire said firmly. "I'll tell you everything." Ava's chest constricted. "Oh, God." Claire turned her gaze to Ethan. Her expression icy, emotionless. "It's over." Ethan shot to his feet. "Claire, don't. Sit down." "Mr. Carter, wide unforgiving." Ethan hesitated, his face twisted with frustration. But Claire didn't stop. "He told me everything," she said, "about the plan to fake the DNA test. About making Ava look like a cheater. About how he wanted full control of his assets, asterisk." Ethan's eyes burned with fury. Ava felt tears sting her eyes. But she refused to let them fall. "This is who he really is." Claire swallowed hard. "He told me if the test made it look like Ava had cheated, she wouldn't get a cent in the divorce. That he could walk away and start over, with me." The silence in the room was deafening. Ava's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just about money. He had planned to erase her. Everything, the years of love. The nights spent crying in his arms. The whispered promises of forever, it had all been a lie. Ethan. He had used her. A monster in a suit. Detective Davis stood up, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Ethan Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, medical record tampering, bribery, and intimidation." Ethan lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. "Claire, you backstabbing little." But Detective Davis shoved him back down. The cuffs clicked into place. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ava felt a deep, undeniable sense of justice. She rose to her feet, pressing a hand to her heart, watching the man she once loved being dragged away. Ethan. Ava expected anger, but instead, she saw panic, fear, desperation. He had lost. And, as the interrogation room door slammed shut, Ava closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. It was over. Justice had won. And now, it was time to rebuild. 2 years had passed since Ava Carter had last seen her ex-husband. Ethan Carter. 2 years since she watched him be led away in handcuffs. His once proud demeanor shattered as Detective Davis read out the charges against him. 2 years since she had learned the devastating truth about the man she had loved and trusted. Now, standing on the wraparound porch of her new home in Savannah, Georgia, she felt like a different woman, one who had been broken but refused to stay down. The soft, golden light of a late spring afternoon bathed her in warmth as she rocked gently in a white wooden chair, watching her 2-year-old daughter, Isla, toddle barefoot through the garden. Isla's bright giggles filled the air, her tiny hands reaching for the fireflies that flickered in the growing dusk. Ava's heart clenched with a fierce, protective love. This was all she had ever wanted, a peaceful life, a safe home, and the chance to watch her child grow without fear, without betrayal, without the weight of a husband plotting her downfall. Yet, even now, the scars of what had happened lingered beneath the surface. She had fought like hell for this peace. After Ethan's arrest, the legal battle had been a war zone. He had hired some of the most ruthless attorneys in Charleston, determined to reduce his sentence, protect his assets, and, most horrifyingly, fight for custody of Isla. Ava had nearly collapsed from exhaustion, but she had refused to back down. With Margaret, her fiercely loyal mother, and Detective Davis standing by her side, she had armed herself with evidence, truth, and sheer, unwavering determination. In the courtroom, Ethan had spun his lies like a desperate man drowning in quicksand. "I was set up. The DNA test wasn't real. Ava is mentally unstable." Each time, Ava sat stone-faced, her fingers clenched into fists beneath the table. Then, Claire Richardson, his former mistress and co-conspirator, testified against him. The moment she took the stand, Ethan's face drained of all color. "He told me everything," Claire had said, her voice firm, though her hands shook, about the plan to make Ava look like a cheater, about falsifying the DNA test, about how he was going to leave her penniless, take their child, and move away with me. Her testimony was the final nail in Ethan's coffin. The judge had ruled in Ava's favor without hesitation. Ethan was sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud, medical record tampering, and intimidation. His real estate empire collapsed overnight, his professional reputation destroyed, and, most importantly, he was permanently stripped of any parental rights. Isla would never have to know the man who had tried to erase her existence. Even now, thinking about that day, Ava felt a small, satisfied fire burn in her chest. She had won, but winning had come at a cost. For months after, she had battled nightmares, visions of waking up to find Isla gone, of Ethan's cold, emotionless voice telling her she was nothing, of standing in that hospital room while the man she had loved demanded a test to prove his own daughter's existence. But slowly, with time, therapy, and the unwavering support of her mother, she had healed. Now, she was more than just a survivor. She was stronger than she had ever been before. A new beginning. Ava had moved to Savannah, Georgia, a fresh start away from the ghosts of Charleston. She had taken on a leadership role at her company, using her experience as a financial risk analyst to advocate for better protections for single mothers in the insurance industry. But more than that, she had become a voice for women like her. At St. Andrew's Church, where she now attended, she led a support group for single mothers who had escaped abusive or manipulative relationships. Her story spread across Savannah, and soon, women from all over came to hear her speak. God never gives us trials we cannot overcome, she would say to them, her voice steady, powerful. What happened to me almost broke me. But I fought back, and so can you. Her words ignited hope in the women who listened. Some were fresh from divorces with men who had tried to strip them of everything. Others were still fighting legal battles. And some were just trying to find their footing as single mothers. But together, they were stronger. She had found purpose in her pain, justice and closure. Though she had moved on, Ava sometimes wondered about Ethan. She didn't ask about him, didn't check the news for updates. But one evening, Margaret arrived with a knowing look on her face. Did you hear? Ava frowned. Hear what? Margaret smirked. Ethan's out of prison. And guess what? Ava said nothing, waiting. He's broke. Margaret continued. No job, no assets, no friends willing to vouch for him. He tried to move back to Charleston, but no one will hire him. Ava's stomach twisted, not with fear, but with satisfaction. Ethan had spent his life manipulating, lying, and scheming to get ahead. And in the end, he had destroyed himself. He had tried to erase her. Instead, he had erased himself. Margaret gave her daughter a proud, knowing look. Justice always wins. Ava glanced out at the porch, where Isla was now fast asleep in a rocking chair. Her little hands curled against her chest. She smiled softly, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served, but more importantly, she had won back her life. And she would never let anyone take it from her again.